Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone, to our first Lag BaOmer, virtual Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer today marks. Hello, everyone. Thumbs up. Second. All right, many more people are joining us. We'll wait another minute. But meanwhile, all right. So Lag BaOmer marks the day of the passing of one of the greatest sages, none other than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the student of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon is famous for being the author of the Zohar, the book of the Kabbalah, the foundation book of Kabbalah, and typically on this day we get together in the parks or at the beach for a nice barbecue and a celebration. And unfortunately, this year we are kind of doing this in a different manner. However, the participation and the connection that we have with each other, in a sense, is stronger this year than in other years. It's interesting that Rabbi Shimon was actually quarantined as well for 13 years, hiding from the Romans who wanted to kill him for teaching Torah and teaching Jewish Yiddishkeit around Israel. One of the most important teachings of Rabbi Akiva is that the greatest mitzvah of Torah, the most important mitzvah of Torah, is to love your fellow like yourself. Just like Hillel said famously to the convert who wanted to convert, and Rabbi Shimon embodied this mitzvah. So when he was about to pass, he asked that the day should not be marked by mourning, but by actually celebrating his life, celebrating his teachings, him giving us not only the law, the body of Torah, but also the soul of Torah, the teaching of the mystics, the teaching of Kabbalah. He was able to elevate people, connect people, and emphasizing. That's why the day of Lag BaOmer is celebrated by unity, a day of unity where we get together, where we unite, and no better way to do it today, all the way from Israel. So, as the idea came up to bring a comedian on, so it reminded me of a joke of this nice Jewish older man who has a butcher store in the Lower East Side. And one day the IRS agent shows up for an audit. And the IRS agent asked the older Jew, Yankel, said, yes, why do you report business expenses, business trips to London? You have business trips to Johannesburg, business trip to Tel Aviv. You're a little butcher store in the Lower East Side. What kind of business trips are you have? So he looks the agent in the eye and says, what's the problem? We deliver. So today I like to deliver all the way from Israel. This is part of our educational series and social series on our, since we have been quarantined over Zoom and YouTube. So we're here at Chabad of Venice. We offer almost daily different classes that people can participate on any level. And we have many more in store for the future, which we're going to show at the end. Before we start, I also want to just emphasize something we've been busy with from the moment from the moment this crisis came. We mobilized as a community to look out for the most vulnerable people in our community, to our healthcare workers, our seniors, those who are ill. And we started with our food project, making sure that people have food and groceries. And I want to thank the many, many volunteers who have stepped up and come here during the week or come weekly deliver. We deliver now over 50 meals a week to our seniors and those who are sick, and to the many donors who helped make this project. And I want to thank you, and I also want to make sure those who didn't have yet the opportunity and have the ability to support and help us so we can help the others. Without further ado, I'll give over to none other than Joel. I wanted to say that Joel Chasnoff was our first comedian we had here in Venice at our first comedy night. We did about 13 years ago. And
Wow.
he literally bought the house down. I don't know if you remember, Joel. So it is such a joy to have you back here with the flavor of your background being live in Israel. Thank you, Joel, for being here. Take it over.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, and greetings, everyone, from my kitchen in Ra'anana, Israel. I didn't realize that I had been to you 13 years ago, but I'm glad to hear you waited a long time for me to come back, but thank you for returning. It's an honor to be here. And I just want to reiterate what the rabbi said, thanking everyone who's been working so hard to keep everyone healthy, and what Chabad is doing to feed the elderly at this time with their Meals on Wheels program. Definitely support that if you can. So before we jump into the jokes, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. Last time I saw you 13 years ago, I guess I was living in New York at that time. In the time since, I have moved to Israel. I now live in Ra'anana, which is about 25 minutes outside of Tel Aviv. One of the big reasons we moved here 4 years ago is because I have 4 kids, and the oldest at that time are twins, and they were 15. And we were sort of at a crossroads. We knew that he was either going to be living in the US and going through college, which, as Jews say, is balagan. I don't know if you've heard the phrase balagan, but it means chaos. All the SATs, ACTs, the essays, the tests. We were choosing between that or serving in the Israeli army. And I myself served in the IDF. My wife is a Sabra Israeli. She served as well. I must say, it wasn't always easy. I had some very tough times. I often cried. But at the end of the day, it was one of the most meaningful years of my life. And I think the idea of giving to Israel, to an idea bigger than yourself, is very important. And so we chose to move to Israel so that our oldest 2 could serve in the army. And they are serving right now, actually. One of them is an expert at only 18 years old. She's an expert in atomic, biological, and chemical warfare. And because Corona is categorized as biological, her unit is actually studying that and helping out with the logistics of keeping Israel on the road to recovery and opening back to normalcy. And her twin sister is serving with combat engineers, doing some work with them. So both are doing very meaningful things at the age of 18, and that's why we're here. And at the end, I want to open this up to questions. So if people do have questions either about their service or about how Israel is handling the Corona situation, I'm happy to talk about that as well. I'm told by the rabbi that you guys have very strong interest and support for Israel. So any questions you have, I'm happy to handle. As the rabbi mentioned, I'm a stand-up comedian. That's been my full-time job for about 20 years now. And what I want to do with you, is share some of my favorite all-time Jewish jokes. You know, as a comedian, you can imagine people come up to me after every show and they say, here's a great joke you can use in your act. I don't know if you remember my act from when I was there, but it's very autobiographical. I talk about my own life, growing up in Jewish day school, serving in the army. And so these classic jokes that people tell me wouldn't exactly fit in my stand-up act, but I love them anyway. These jokes are great, and more than just being funny, they say something about the Jewish people. I think the best Jewish jokes don't just make us laugh. They tell a little story about who we are and how Jews think. So I'll try to shed some light on that as well. Before we jump in, I just want to point out 2 little buttons at the bottom of your screen. You might see at the bottom of your screen, if you scroll around a bit, there's one button called chat. If you click on chat, you can send me a message privately if you want to just send it to me, or you can send it to the group in general. And this is a great thing because, you know, stand-up comedians, what I love about stand-up comedy is we always know how we're doing, right? A musician can play piano for 2 hours and have no idea if the audience liked it. In stand-up comedy, if you're laughing, I know I'm doing okay. And if you're not laughing, I know I have to come up with a new idea quick. I love the feedback. With Zoom, there really isn't much feedback. So if you could use the chat function just to send me a little note here and there, I liked it, or I didn't like it, or whatever you want to honestly say, I'm happy to hear it, and it keeps the feedback coming to me. There's also a little button called reactions. It's a little smiley face with a plus. If you click on that, you can get those little pictures that we call emojis, hands clapping and other little images. And that's another way that you can say to me that you liked a certain joke. There are no negative emojis. So if you don't like something, you just got to stick your thumb up and go like that. But hopefully that won't happen today. So let's jump right in with our first series of jokes. And the first category of Jewish jokes I want to talk about are jokes that have to do with optimism. Staying positive and having a positive outlook. That's one of the great characteristics of the Jewish people, is that no matter how dire the situation, we can keep it positive. We have a positive spin. And when Corona first broke out, I thought to myself, what jokes are there in the Jewish people, in the Jewish world, that could say something about how we're coping? What jokes are there about optimism? And two jokes came to mind. The first one is about the flood. You might know this joke. It's a classic Jewish joke. The scientists of the world determine that a huge flood is coming in 3 days, and it's going to wipe out the entire earth. So the heads of the major religions get on TV to deliver their message. The Pope gets on TV and he says, "My friends, the flood will be here in 3 days. That means we have 3 days to accept Jesus as our Lord." And the chief imam, the head of Islam, gets on TV and he says, "My friends, the flood will be here in 3 days. That means we have 3 days to convert to Islam and accept Allah as our savior." And the chief rabbi gets on TV and he says, "My friends, the flood is coming in 3 days. That means we have 3 days to learn how to live underwater." And I love that idea, learning to live underwater. It's not just a punchline, it's a metaphor for how Jews always have been and will continue to be. We always find a way to adapt and to cope, no matter what hardships come to us. And right now, doing this session over Zoom is a way of living underwater. I personally had not used Zoom once, even a month ago. Now it's become as common to me as my cell phone, and that's probably the same for many of you. It's a way to live underwater. So that's the first joke that came to mind. The second one is the joke about the priest, the minister, and the rabbi, as many of these jokes are. And they're talking about what they want people to say at their funeral. And the priest says, "At my funeral, I want people to say that I was a kind and generous human being." And the minister says, "At my funeral, I want people to say that I was always there to listen." And the rabbi says, "At my funeral, I want people to say, 'Look, he's moving.'" And clearly, the message in that joke is that even in the worst situation you could possibly imagine, being in your own casket at your own funeral, the rabbi, the Jewish person, believes that there is still hope, that there's a mistake, that there is still life to be lived. It's a very true joke to the way Jews think optimistically. And I must say, many jokes in Judaism have to do with rabbis. In Jewish humor, rabbis are great characters. They're very wise, which is not the same as intelligent. Intelligent is being book smart. They're wise, which means they're clever. They see the situation, how it really is. There's the joke about the minister, priest, and the rabbi, of course. The minister goes to a barber to get his haircut. And after the haircut, it looks wonderful. So he reaches for his wallet to pay. But the barber says, "No, no, no, you're a man of God. It's free. It's on the house." So the minister thanks him. And that afternoon, he comes back with a crucifix for the barber as a gift. Well, the next day, who comes in? The priest. He gets his haircut. It looks great. He reaches for money to pay. But the barber says, "No, no, no, you're holy. You're a man of God. It's free on the house." So the priest thanks him. And that afternoon, he comes back with a New Testament as a gift for the barber. Well, the next day, who comes in? Of course, the rabbi. He gets his haircut, looks great. He reaches for his wallet to pay, but the barber says, "No, no, no, you're holy. You're a man of God. It's on the house." So the rabbi thanks him. And that afternoon, he comes back with another rabbi. And I personally am not bothered by this joke. Some people might say, "Oh, it's anti-Semitic. It only means Jews are after a good deal." I don't agree with that at all. I think this joke is just about a rabbi who sees the situation for what it really is. Rabbis get free haircuts, so why not bring another rabbi? However, someone once said to me, "What if the person who told you this joke wasn't Jewish? Then would you still feel it wasn't anti-Semitic?" And I must admit, if somebody who wasn't Jewish told me this joke, I think it would change the message. I think no longer would it be about a clever rabbi. I think now suddenly it might be a joke about Jews only going for a good deal. And it reminded me of my favorite episode of Seinfeld. I don't know if we have any Seinfeld sitcom fans here, but in one of my favorite episodes, it's called The Anti-Dentite. And this is an episode about a dentist who converts to Judaism. And within months of converting to Judaism, he starts telling Jewish jokes. And this bothers Jerry, the main character. And it sort of raises the question, who gets to tell Jewish jokes? Who owns our humor? And I'm just going to share a quick clip from this episode, and then I'll talk about it a little more.
Fine, I'll make an appointment. All right, it is cavity time. Here we go. Which reminds me, did you hear the one about the rabbi and the farmer's daughter? Huh? Those aren't matzo balls. What?
Tim, do you think you should be making jokes like that?
Why not? I'm Jewish, remember?
I know, but
Jerry, it's our sense of humor that sustained us as a people for 3,000 years.
5,000.
5,000, even better. Okay. Chrissy, give me a shtickle of fluoride.
People of fluoride. I love that punchline. And what's great is that Seinfeld and many people often said that that show was a show about nothing, but in fact, it's a show about very deep things. In this case, a huge existential question about humor. Who gets to tell jokes and who owns humor? And I'm really thrilled that in this sitcom, they were able to explore that. You know, we talked about rabbis. In general, synagogue life is a great topic for Jewish jokes. So now let's tell a few that relate to Jews and synagogues and the shuls they belong to. There's a classic joke about the Jewish man who's on a boat, and the boat gets shipwrecked, and he swims all by himself to a deserted island, and he lives on this island for 3 years all alone. Well, one day a helicopter is flying overhead, and the Jewish man signals to the helicopter, and the helicopter comes down, and they see that he's been living alone, so they call a rescue boat. And of course, on this rescue boat, it's not just people to rescue him. The press is there, TV news cameras and journalists. They want to interview this man who lived all by himself in the middle of the ocean on a deserted island for 3 years. So they storm the island and they come and talk to the man. And they notice 2 small huts have been built on this island out of sand. And so the journalists point to the first small hut and they say to the man, what is this hut right here? And the man says, well, I am a Jew, and this hut is my synagogue. Every day, 3 times a day, I would go into this hut, my synagogue, and I would pray to Hashem that he would rescue me. And then they say, wow, that is such a beautiful and spiritual idea. And what is this other hut right next to it? And the man says, that's the synagogue I wouldn't go to if you paid me. And I think this joke actually has a little message to say about the way so many Jews feel about their Judaism. Sometimes they know more about what they wouldn't do and about the shul they wouldn't join than what they actually are willing to do in the synagogue they would go to. And that joke sheds a little bit of light on that. There's the joke about the synagogue with a mice problem. The synagogue is filled with mice, and no matter what they do, they can't get rid of the mice. The custodian puts out mouse traps. They don't work. The mice come back. They call an exterminator, and he sprays his poisons around the synagogue. Doesn't work. The mice are back within a few days. Finally, the rabbi says, you know what? I have an idea of how to get rid of these mice. Let me try something. So the rabbi works his magic, and lo and behold, the mice are gone. After a month, the mice still haven't returned. So his congregants all turn to the rabbi, and they say, Rabbi, that was a miracle. What did you do? How did you get rid of the mice? And he says, easy. I gave them all a bar mitzvah. Once you do that, they never come back. And this joke, like so many Jewish jokes, has a little message. The message in this joke is that many, many Jews are connected to the shul, the synagogue, when they need it. But then after the bar mitzvah, after the life cycle event, they turn away and they don't come back. And I think many rabbis would like people to stay longer and wish that this joke weren't so true to how many Jews behave. But that's what jokes do. They're able to shed some light on the way we actually are. There's a joke I recently heard about the shamus. I don't know if you guys know what the shamus is, but the shamus is a famous character in Jewish stories, in Jewish history, and sometimes in Jewish humor. The shamus is sort of the custodian of the shul. Usually it's somebody from a poor background. His job is to come in and unlock the doors at the beginning of the day and lock them at the end of the day and mop the floors and sort of take care of the synagogue. He's sort of a lowly creature. So in this joke, the rabbi walks into the shul the week before Yom Kippur. It's called the 10 holy, the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the rabbi comes into the shul and he gets before the ark in the sanctuary and he kneels down and he cries out, "Oh, oh, Holy One, blessed be he. I am nothing. I am nothing and nothing at all." And the cantor hears this, the chazan. So the cantor comes in to the sanctuary and he kneels down beside the rabbi and he looks up to the heavens and says, "Oh, Holy One, blessed be he. I too am nothing. I am nothing at all." And then the shamus hears them and he too comes into the sanctuary and he gets down on his knees and he looks up at the sky and says, "Oh, Holy One, blessed be he. I too am nothing at all." And the cantor turns to the rabbi and says, "Puh, look who thinks he's nothing." So you have to know what shamuses are to get that joke. But it was the first time I'd heard that. And I must say, in general, there aren't many jokes about cantors in the Jewish people. There are many jokes about rabbis and other characters, but there aren't really jokes about cantors. I recently heard another synagogue joke. In this one, it's the week before Rosh Hashanah, and a bunch of terrorists invade the shul, and they take the rabbi, the cantor, and the synagogue president hostage. I don't know if you have a president at your Chabad, but in this case, the shul president is one of the characters. Well, hours later, after many negotiations, the governor stands tough. He's not going to give the ransom to the terrorists. He's not going to give them money, a getaway car, or a jet. So the terrorists gather the 3 hostages in a corner, and they tell them that things look bad. They have no other choice, but they're going to have to shoot them. Nevertheless, to show that they're not really all that bad, the terrorists grant each hostage one last wish. So the rabbi goes first. The rabbi says, "Please, for the past 3 months, I've been working on my Rosh Hashanah sermon. What a waste if I were to die right now and never got a chance to deliver this sermon. I will go happily if you allow me to recite my sermon. It's only 2 hours long." So the terrorists promise the rabbi that he'll get his wish. He can deliver his sermon. Then the cantor says, "My wish, after 50 years, I've finally gotten the Hineni prayer just right. What a shame if I were to die and not chant Hineni for an audience. It's only an hour and a half long. Then I too will go happily." So the terrorists promise to grant the cantor his wish, that he can recite Hineni. Then they turn to the shul president and they say, "What's your wish?" And the shul president says, "Shoot me first." So you have to join a big synagogue to relate to that joke. But I think that's the way that represents sort of the way a lot of Jews feel about the high holidays and all these sermons, and sometimes the showboating that happens in many shuls when the cantor and rabbi turn the stage into a Broadway auditorium and hog the spotlight for themselves. So those are some jokes that shed light on synagogue life. The next category I want to talk to you about is very apropos to just what happened a few days ago, Mother's Day. I'm sure we have some mothers in the audience right now. And some of our best jokes in Jewish humor revolve around the character of the Jewish mother. And I don't have to tell you what Jewish mothers are like in Jewish humor. They worry, they give their children guilt, they kvetch, they complain. In my stand-up act, I talk about my own Jewish mother. I tell the story of how guilt was her way of getting me to do whatever she wanted. When I was a kid, she had a bumper sticker on her car that said, "If my son worked just a little bit harder, I too would have an honor roll student at Evanston High School." And that is a perfect example of the type of guilt she gave me. My mom was also a worrier. I think all mothers worry, but what is it about the Jewish mother? It's that ability they have to look at any situation and find something to worry about, right, in that situation. When I was a kid, I grew up in Chicago, I should add. We didn't take many vacations where we had to fly. Most of the time, we would just drive to the Wisconsin Dells or to St. Louis. But once in a while, we would fly somewhere neat, like Disneyland or Texas, where my dad is from. And anytime we flew on an airplane, my mother would do this thing. Maybe some of you can relate to this. My mother would split us up onto two separate flights. My family never flew together. Does anyone know why? What the Jewish logic is here? Feel free to go ahead and chat in an answer if you know why it would make sense for a Jewish mother to split her family onto two separate flights. Well, it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It's so that if one of the planes goes down, only half the family is lost. The other half can live on and mourn them in misery and guilt for the rest of their lives, which is what we call a normal Jewish existence. My mother also had a rule that I was not allowed to have anything with my name on it. I couldn't have a backpack with my name on it. I couldn't wear clothing with my name on it. On my 12th birthday, my Zadie, my grandfather, gave me a Chicago Bears football jersey, my favorite team, with the number 34 on the back, Walter Payton. Except on the back, instead of Payton, it had my name, Joel. Well, my mother wouldn't let me wear the jersey outside the house. Does anyone know why? What's the Jewish mother logic here? Again, it makes sense if you think about it. My mother was afraid that I would wear the jersey to the park and a stranger would see me in the jersey and he would read my name and then he would call me by name. Hey, Joel, your mom told me to pick you up. And because he was using my name, I would think he knew me. So I'd go with him because I'm an idiot. And that, by the way, is why there are no Jewish athletes. It's not that we're bad at sports. Our mothers won't let us wear the jerseys. So in case you've ever wondered, that is the reason why. But there are many great jokes about Jewish mothers in Jewish humor. I see some of you giving me thumbs up. I really do appreciate that. It's like nothing. It's nothing compared to being in a room with actual live human beings, but a thumb pointing vertically upward every once in a while is a great thing for a comic. There are great classic Jewish jokes about Jewish mothers. Some of you might know them. You know, there's the question, what's the difference between a Jewish mother and a Rottweiler? Eventually, the Rottweiler will let go. So that's a very short joke about the way Jewish mothers cling to their children and loved ones. There's the joke about the three Jewish mothers who are sitting around and they are debating. They're having sort of a little contest about whose children love them the most. And the first Jewish mother says, my son loves me so much that this year for Hanukkah, he's going to fly his entire family down from New York so that we can light the menorah here in Miami, in my home. The second mother says, that's nothing. My son loves me so much that next spring for Passover, he's going to fly me and his family to Israel so we can do a Seder in Jerusalem. And the third mother says, that's nothing. My son loves me so much that he goes to a psychiatrist twice a week, pays him $150 an hour. And who does he talk about the entire time? Me! And that's actually another characteristic of the Jewish mother. They don't realize that their love is actually way too overbearing for their children. They think it's just love. They think it's just their way of showing their tender, loving care. But the kids are the ones who suffer by going to psychiatrists twice a week. There's jokes about Jewish mothers worrying about their children's professions, right? Jewish mothers always want their kids to have a good and honorable profession. There's the joke about the first ever Jewish president. And he's sworn into office. He gives his inaugural address. And then as an honor to his mother, the very first thing he does as president, he picks up the phone, he calls his mother, and he invites her to Seder at the White House for Passover. Well, of course, the mother is thrilled. She accepts the invitation. Then she hangs up the phone, picks up the phone and calls her best friend, Barbara. She says, Barbara, you'll never guess where I'm going for Passover Seder. You know my son, my eldest son, the doctor, his brother's place. And the message in this joke, obviously, is that Still, being a doctor is the highest level of profession that a Jewish mother could have for her son. You could be president of the United States. Doesn't matter. If your son is a pediatrician, your other one, then he's just going to be the brother of the doctor. That's how Jewish mothers think. Now, I must say, there really aren't that many jokes about Jewish fathers. You know, it's easy to find jokes about Jewish mothers, but Jewish fathers are a little more difficult to find. I've found a few recently. The first one is about the kid who comes home from school and he's very excited. He said, Dad, I just got a part in the school play. And the father says, well, what's your part? That's great. What's your part? And the son says, I got the role of the Jewish father. And his dad says, you go back to school. You tell your teacher you want a speaking part. So even that joke is kind of about Jewish mothers, right? It's about Jewish fathers, but really the punchline is about how Jewish fathers don't get to speak. There's another joke, which is more about a little more positive to the fathers. This one is about a young woman who comes home with her fiance to meet her parents. And after dinner, her mother tells her father that she should go and, explore the young man, try to get some information out of him. So the father invites the fiance, the young man, the groom-to-be, he invites him into his study so they can have a drink. And the father says, so what are your plans for the future? And the young man says, I am a Torah scholar. And the father says, okay, a Torah scholar, that's really admirable, but how are you going to provide a house for my daughter to live in as she's accustomed to? And the young man says, God will provide. I see, the father says. And do you plan to buy her an engagement ring, a beautiful ring, the way my daughter deserves? And the young man says, well, for now, I'm going to concentrate on my studies, but don't worry, God will provide. The father says, okay, I see. And how about children? I mean, you will have children one day. How are you going to support the children? And the young groom says, don't worry, God will provide. Well, the conversation goes on and on like this, and each time the father asks a question, the young man insists that God will provide. Well, later that night, the mother talks to the father, and she says, well, honey, how did it go? And the father says, well, he has no job. He has no plans. But the good news is he thinks I'm God. So that is a little joke about Jewish fathers and the way they see the fiancés who might not be supporting their daughters the way they had hoped and intended. But in general, there are way many more jokes about Jewish mothers than there are about Jewish fathers. The next category I want to talk about is contemporary issues, jokes that are about issues that Jews are going through right now. One of the biggest issues in Judaism we talk about now is assimilation, the fact that 50% of Jews marry people who aren't Jewish, and we call that assimilation. Now, many years ago, in the 1940s and 50s, assimilation existed as well. However, it meant something different. Back then, only about 5% of Jews intermarried, so assimilation meant something else. It meant trying to fit in as somebody who wasn't Jewish, even though everybody knew that you actually were Jewish. And one of the jokes that's about this is about the Jewish man who tries to join a country club, except of course the country club is restricted, no Jews allowed. So the Jewish man has to make up a whole biography so that he can pass the interview. So he goes in for his interview with the country club president, and the president says, welcome to our beautiful country club. Why don't you start out by telling me your name? And the Jewish man says, my name is Patrick McCormick III. Very not Jewish sounding name. And the president of the club says, oh, that sounds wonderful. And what is your profession, Mr. McCormick? And the Jewish man says, my profession, I sell real estate in New Hampshire. Very not Jewish profession. And the president of the club says, well, that sounds just great. What are your hobbies? Tell me what you like to do. And the Jewish man says, my hobbies? Oh, where to begin? Sailing, horseback riding, golf, tennis, croquet. And the president of the club says, well, you sound like the perfect candidate for this club. Just one last question that I need to ask. What is your religion? And the man says, my religion? Why, of course, I'm a goy. And the punchline here is actually making fun of the Jew. The punchline is saying, hey, you can go around pretending you're Patrick McCormick III, pretending you're not Jewish, but stop pretending, because we all know who you are. You define the world as us and them, Jews and Goyim. And so this joke is actually kind of poking a little bit of fun at him. One of my favorite jokes about contemporary issues is about the different movements in Judaism. I've always thought personally it's a little crazy that, we Jews are such a small sliver of the population, and yet we divide ourselves up into smaller and smaller groups, and Reform, conservative, Orthodox. And there's a great joke about that. This joke is about, you can know which movement's wedding you are at depending on who is pregnant at that wedding, right? So you always know that you're at an Orthodox wedding if the mother of the bride is pregnant, right? Because Orthodox women, they have babies their entire lives. You always know when you're at a conservative wedding because the rabbi is pregnant. You know when you're at a Reform wedding because the bride is pregnant. And you know when you're at a Reconstructionist wedding because both brides are pregnant. And yeah, that joke might be a little bit biting and mean. I don't think it's so mean though, but it actually sheds some good light on the different type of movements and some of the characteristics they have. And everyone I know, even in the Reconstructionist movement, they think that's a funny joke. And someone Moshe just tweeted in, LOL, that's good. So I'm glad it took me only half an hour to get you to like one, Moshe, but thank you for sharing that insight. I'm glad you liked it. I want to do a few jokes in the category of Israel. I want to say that Israeli humor is very different than American humor. Israeli humor is very dark. It's much more aggressive. They're willing to make fun of things quicker than we are, whether it's suicide bombings, God forbid, or other wars or other bad events. Israelis are willing to joke about it. And I understand why. Now, having lived here almost 4 years, there's a lot of pressure in Israel. We're surrounded by enemies. Everyone goes to the army. We all know what military life is like. And there's this constant sort of threat hanging over the country. And because of that, one of the ways we deal is with humor. Woody Allen had a great line. He said that comedy is tragedy plus time. And I think comedy helps you get through rough situations. And because life in Israel can be like a pressure cooker at times, humor helps people out, even very quickly after certain events happen. What I'm going to share right now are some jokes about the Israeli personality. One of the most famous jokes about Israelis is about the dinner at the White House, and the ambassador from America and Russia in Israel are having a conversation when all of a sudden the ambassador from England walks over and he says, "Pardon me, gentlemen, but what is your opinion of the food shortage in Africa?" And the American says, "What's a shortage?" And the Russian says, "What is food?" And the Israeli says, "What's pardon me?" The idea there is that Israelis are rude, blunt. They don't use formalities like please, thank you, pardon me. And I must say, it's one of the biggest cultural, thank you, Rabbi Shalom. I must say it's one of the biggest cultural differences for me as an immigrant from the US. I'm not only an immigrant, but I grew up in Chicago, which is the Midwest. I don't know if we have any Midwesterners, but in the Midwest, you are very polite. You don't share your feelings. If the waitress brings the wrong order, you just sit there and quietly eat it. You don't want to complain or make a fuss. Meanwhile, in Israel, there's no such thing. Israelis fight for what they want. They're very outspoken. They share their feelings. You never have to wonder what an Israeli is thinking about you. So anyone who's ever been to Israel, you see that that is one of the big differences between Israelis and we are. Now, what Israelis will say, and I actually agree with this, they'll say, yes, we might be a little bit blunt and we might tell the truth, but at least we're honest. In America, people will say one thing to your face and another thing behind your back. And at the end of the day, though, Israelis, you always know where you stand, and we will always be there for you. We will never abandon each other. And I must say, that's one of the great things about living in Israel, is really feeling like you live in one big family. There's this idea that Israel isn't safe, but I actually feel like it's the safest country in the world. And I've traveled quite a bit. I've been to 40 countries in my life. And I really do think Israel is the safest. My kids ride buses all the time. They walk places alone. They do things I would never allow them to do in America, simply because people are looking out for each other. And there's this sense of unity that I don't think, I don't see in any other country in the world for the ones I've visited. And that's one of the really special things about living here. Before we conclude, you know what, I'll do one more Israeli joke and then we'll move to our last topic. There's a joke about the very famous rabbi and the very anonymous bus driver in Israel, who both die on the same day and they go to heaven. So they go to heaven for their interview to see if they will be allowed into heaven. And the rabbi goes first, and he goes to meet with the Holy One, blessed be he, with Hashem, with God. And the interview, it lasts a very long time, for 2 hours. God asks him questions about what he taught and his students and what he did. And finally, after two hours, God says that he will be allowed into heaven. Then the bus driver comes for his interview, and after 1 minute, very quick, the bus driver is allowed into heaven. And the rabbi is very upset with it. He goes back to God and he says, excuse me, I don't understand what's happening here. I spent my entire life teaching Torah. I gave these long, beautiful sermons about your teachings and about the way Jews should live. And this guy, he's a bus driver. It took 2 hours for you to decide to let me into heaven, but him, only 1 minute. What's going on? And God says, I'll be honest with you. When you gave your long sermons about the Torah, everyone slept. But when this bus driver drove his bus, everybody prayed. So that's a little insight into how Israelis drive. I must say, it's changing. Israelis are not the crazy drivers they used to be. I think the country's opening up. Many more Israelis have traveled. They see how people behave in the rest of the world. And so some of those stereotypes about the aggressive, prickly Israeli are changing. But I think some of these jokes are sort of classics and give some insights into the way Israelis behave and think, and how those ways are different from the way Americans do. I'm about to conclude, but before I do, I'll give you some final jokes, of course, but before I conclude, I want to open up the room to any questions people have right now. If someone wants to ask a question about humor or Jewish humor, or if they want to ask a question about Israeli life, what life is like here, or my kids' army experience, or really anything related to those topics at all, maybe the rabbi can allow you to unmute yourself. So not everyone shout at once. I know one of the great things about Zoom is that rabbis have had their greatest wish granted, the power to mute the Jews whenever they want. So maybe the rabbi can unmute you, and then one at a time, if you do want to say something, simply click your mute, unmute button, and that way you can speak to me directly. Maybe raise your hand also so I know exactly who is speaking.
Okay, I 1 second, I mute you also, Joe. Hold on.
I'm good.
Okay, good.
Okay, so if you do want to speak, raise your hand, and then the rabbi will unmute you.
Actually, you can unmute yourself at this point.
Okay. Still raise your hand first. Amy, it looks like Amy Schaefer, or whoever's using Amy Schaefer's computer, has a question. So go ahead, that computer, and ask your question. But you need to unmute yourself because I don't hear you.
Is there a difference between an Israeli audience and an American audience?
That is a great question, and yes, there is. If you go to an American comedy club, usually the first row is the most difficult one to fill. Americans do not want to sit in the front row. They want to be far back, maybe in the middle. They don't want to be part of the show. They're afraid they'll be made fun of. In Israel, the most desired seats are the front row. People want to be in the show. They want the comic to make fun of them and even call them on stage. And I think that's one big difference. The other one is that Israeli audiences are less patient. I think in general, Israelis are less patient, but the audiences are less patient. So a stand-up comedy act like Seinfeld, where he'll tell a story and then there'll be a little bit of a pause, that doesn't go over as well here in Israel. Israelis want joke, 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 punchline, 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 very fast. It's sort of the idea of, we don't have time to sit around, get to the humor. So those are the two big differences that come to mind, but that's a great question. Other questions people have, feel free to speak up. No, okay, so I am going to go ahead. Yes,
Yeah, the Ronnie, I'm gonna unmute you.
Thank you.
Ronnie.
Do you deliver your humor in Hebrew? And is there a difference in how you deliver using a different language?
That's also a very good question. Only recently have I started performing in Hebrew. I've done a lot of shows here in Israel for English audiences. There are known English-speaking communities in Ra'anana, where I live, in Modi'in, in Jerusalem, and Zichron Yaakov. But I was very hesitant to perform in Hebrew. My Hebrew is good, but not completely fluent. But after 4 years here, my Hebrew's gotten much better. So I've just started to perform in Hebrew. But I do mix in English. And at the beginning, I was a little hesitant to do that. But then I realized that Israelis actually like it. It makes me, as the comedian, look vulnerable when I don't fully know their language. And Israelis like to believe that they are the stronger character in any situation. Sort of a deep psychological thing going on. But I've noticed that admitting that you're a little bit weak, that you don't fully know the language, is actually an advantage. So I throw in some English here and there, and Israelis all know, most Israelis do know English very well these days, thanks to Netflix and TV. It's not the generations of 40 years ago. The other difference is just speeding it up and being a little more aggressive, the way the Schaefer computer had asked, not telling the long stories, but really getting to the joke quicker. What's great is that I can do, in the US, when I perform a Jewish show, I have to find a Jewish audience. I couldn't just do my Jewish material in a comedy club. Here, I can do Jewish material in a comedy club because even if they're not religious, they know what Shabbat is, they know what kosher is, what a sukkah is. And that's one of the special things about living in a Jewish country.
Liz has a question. Liz is live from Netanya, not far from you, Joe.
Oh, wow.
Joel, I saw you many years ago at a Hadassah conference in Florida.
Oh, great.
And I have been here 4 years now. And I mentioned in the comments, I'm friends with Liami. I know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I missed the last show that you did. I was away. When are you performing again here in Israel in English?
Yes, I think we just got a date. It is June. I don't know the exact date, but it's the third Thursday in June. There's this English theater, and I guess this is sort of important for everyone to know. There's the first English-only theater
Grant
in
and
all of
Danielle.
Israel. Yes, Grant Crankshaw.
Friends of mine.
And it's really the first time. It's sort of an experiment. Can we support an English-only theater in Israel? But so far, they've been doing very well. Their business was just getting off the ground when Corona struck. So hopefully people will come back and support English performances. But that would be the time. Check with them, because of course on their website, Liz, Grant would post that.
I've been to their theater several times. It's
great.
Good.
Any last final questions before we? Yes, Lena. I'm just gonna say Lena because I can't pronounce your last name.
You have to unmute yourself.
I don't hear you, Lena. Yeah.
Okay, now go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we do.
Okay. I missed the beginning of the meeting, so I don't know if you already covered it. If not, what brought you to decision to move to Israel?
Yeah, so I did cover it, but I'll tell you quickly again. I grew up in the United States, but I served in the Army when I was 24. Actually, I don't think I mentioned that. After college, I moved to Israel and I served in a combat unit of the Israeli Army. I had always wanted to do that. I felt a deep connection with Israel. I actually wrote a book about it, and wouldn't you know it, I just happen to have the book right here. It's called The 188th Crybaby Brigade. It's my comedic memoir about my life in the Israeli Army. And although it was tough, I had a good experience. My wife is a Sabra Israeli as well. And we have 4 kids. The oldest 2 are twins. At the time, they were 15. Now they're 18. And we were choosing between college there or them doing the Army. And one reason was because we wanted them to do the Army before college or instead of college. Hopefully, they will go to college later. The other reasons, though, is we always wanted to try raising the kids in Israel. We'd lived in New York for 20 years. We found the pace very, exciting at first, but eventually it got to be exhausting living in New York, raising 4 kids in New York. And we wanted to try living in Israel, where the calendar is Jewish, where Shabbat isn't just another weekend day, but it's the Sabbath for an entire country. And I must say, so far, it's been good. The first 2 years, I won't lie to you. The first 2 years, I wanted to go back to the US. I found it very difficult. The people, the Israeli attitude, the way they're tough, the way they, the alpha male sort of mentality, it was hard for me. But I turned a corner, and now I'm very happy here. And I must say, Israel is also handling Corona very well, I think. We're often compared to Belgium because Belgium has a similar population size. And if you look statistically, Israel is doing much better than Belgium. And I think even though Israelis don't always like to respect authority, they've done a very good job of listening to the doctors here who've been telling them how to live and conduct themselves. And we have more recovered Corona patients than people with Corona right now, which is a great sign for
Wow.
Yes, I see a finger from Mira Kozer. But you need to unmute yourself.
Go ahead, Mira. I unmute you.
Okay. Hi, it's
Hi.
nice to have a nice laugh during this horrible times in Jewish history, in Bible, and all of that. And today we have a haircut already. Baruch Hashem. How it's Lag BaOmer. How did you celebrate that day today, your family?
It was, usually Lag BaOmer, you know it. You know it's Lag BaOmer because the smell in the air of all the bonfires is very thick and strong. And maybe the rabbi, before we end, could just tell us why there are bonfires, because I personally do not know. But everyone does bonfires. The kids spend the whole day together with their different friends. This year, there were no bonfires. I must say Chabad had a little parade. They drove around the streets of my town. They probably did this in other towns as well, playing music and standing, jumping in the back of a pickup truck, getting people to dance. And people came out of their houses and filmed it, and kids were dancing. And so thank you for, Chabad for doing that. But all these holidays have been much, much different. We had Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, just a week or two ago. And that's usually the biggest celebration of the year. And it was we were on complete curfew, lockdown from 5 p.m. on the Erev Yom HaAtzmaut to 8 a.m. the day after. We were not allowed to leave more than 100 meters from our house. Big, big change for Israelis, but we're very optimistic that that in the future, next year, everything will be fine. Someone just asked, what is Israel doing to have so many people recovering from the virus? I think they figured out very early on who's getting Corona, that it's really not happening from touching an elevator button or by touching a piece of fruit that somebody else touched. They realize that it's really, in Israel at least, happening when people have direct contact for 30 minutes or more with someone else who has it. Most people who are infected, I think all people who are infected in Israel, are a friend or relative of someone else who had it. It wasn't just passing randomly from stranger to stranger. So that's one thing. We are required to wear masks, and we get a fine from the police. The police are out, and if you don't have a mask on, they have been showing up and giving people steep fines, and Israelis hate to pay fines. So we're all wearing masks. There's debates on how much they help, but that's one thing we do. And everything was shut down. I mean, and when I say everything, I mean everything. School, coffee shops, barbers. Businesses were completely shut down. Now, what are the economic repercussions? That's yet to be seen. But in terms of handling it, we really lived in quarantine, all of us, for a good month. And although it was extreme, I think it helped.
Actually, our community had a planned trip to Israel on March 16th that was canceled, unfortunately.
Are you going to reschedule?
Yes, right now it's on for next year, March 1st. So it's way too early to know how things are going to play out.
Yeah, I agree.
But Joel, you remind me when you said about the Israelis and being their politeness in Israel. So when I came to the yeshiva, I was a 16-year-old teenager. I did not know Hebrew that well. Kind of picked it up, and it was like the first day in the dining room, and there was this big Moroccan chef that stood there with his very oily fish, passing out the fish. And I wanted to be, I grew up in Europe and Switzerland. I was this little nice, polite, innocent kid, and I wanted to be nice, give him a compliment after finishing eating. So I told him, Hadag haya al hapanim.
That's a
I thought
mistake.
al hapanim, shein apunim, al hapanim means it's great. It's the opposite. so that was
Allah panim means terrible, horrible. So you're lucky you're here with us right now,
for
Sean.
for the rest of the year. Yeah, that was.
But you know, when you mention the food, that reminds me of a joke about El Al, about the stewardess on El Al who's serving passengers their food on the flight, and she comes to one man and says, "Would you like to have dinner?" And the man says, "What are the choices?" And the El Al stewardess says, "Yes or no." So that's the Israeli personality yet again.
All right. Are there any other questions before we? Yeah, it's a list. Hold on. And also, before I could take questions, if anybody has suggestions or ideas they want to have other presenters come up, as we can do this now so internationally in an amazing way, please put in the chat or email us. We're looking for innovative ideas that can bring people together. You don't have to be participating in synagogue or be religious at all. As you know, in Chabad, we are open to everyone. One of the ideas that came up, and I'm getting a lot of requests, and we're looking into it, is regarding the Netflix series Unorthodox. I'm sure most of you have watched it. And we are getting a lot of interesting questions. But we are looking to get a speaker on that film. So look out for the information. Yes, Liz.
I was going to comment in terms of the Israeli culture. My first experience going in to open a bank, and the bank clerk is on the phone, and she's like this, and they go like this.
Yeah.
And, as an American, from the New York area, they go like this, and you right away go, "Whoa, you looking for a fight?"
But I guarantee you, if you had any banking issues, that bank clerk would go through hoops and walk through fire in order to help you, especially as a new immigrant. So although they're tough and in your face, at the end of the day, there's no one you'd rather have on your side.
Well, and the other thing is, if an Anglo bumps into an Israeli, the American will say, "Oh, excuse me." But if an Israeli bumps into an American, the American will still say, "Excuse me," and the Israeli will look at them like, "What'd you do?"
Right. What are you sorry for?
Yeah, what are you sorry for?
I need to wrap it up, but I do appreciate you all sticking around, and I'm getting some comments in the chat that you've enjoyed it and had a good laugh. So that means a lot to me. I'm going to end with one joke that I call not necessarily Jewish, but it should be Jewish. These characters aren't Jewish, but I feel like it's funnier when they are. This joke is about the woman in Florida. And although you're on the West Coast, right? So this is on the East Coast. The woman is in Florida. She's listening to the radio when all of a sudden a special report comes on the radio, and the announcer says, "We have a special announcement. There's an emergency. We need to let you know that there's a car driving the wrong way on Interstate 95 south of Miami." And so the woman picks up her phone and she calls her elderly father on his cell phone, and she says, Dad, you got to be careful. There's a car driving the wrong way on I-95. And he says, "One car? Try all of them." So do they have to be Jewish? Not necessarily, but I think that joke is funnier when the characters are Jewish. I want to thank everyone for joining tonight. I want to reiterate the rabbi's message earlier that he's trying to raise funds for a wonderful project in which they deliver food, I believe it's to seniors, correct, Rabbi? So if anyone can give...
It's the seniors, people who are sick. Unfortunately, we have people who are struggling with illness. We have several people that I know personally who actually have the virus, who are quarantined and are challenged with that. And anybody, if you know somebody in the community that can use a meal or use food or have volunteers go shop for them, please reach out to us. We're here to help 24/7. Thank you, Joel. If I may end up, somebody asked me, can I share my favorite joke? If I may do my final joke.
Sure.
And again, it's not necessarily a Jewish joke, but you can always change it to Jewish characters. So this is, what's my favorite joke? All right, so this is one of them. This lady married for 30 years, dies, she goes up to heaven, and the angel greets her, and she sees through the gate this beautiful paradise. She asked the angel, "Wow, how did I get in here?" So the angel says, "Well, you have to know how to spell one word." "All right, what's the word?" "Love." "Sure, Love." She gets in. She's having the best time. about a year later, the angel comes to her and says, listen, I have to go away for the day. Can you guard the door? And you know how to let people in? She says, sure. She stands by the door, and sure enough, a few minutes later, her husband shows up. And she says, wow, where have you been? He says, well, ever since you passed away, life has been amazing for me. He says, what? Tell me more. He says, well, that nurse that you never liked, I married her. And then a month later, I won the lottery. And we took this beautiful trip around the world, and we bought this mansion on this island. We're just having the best time of my life. And then I was on my yacht, and all of a sudden I crashed, and here I am. And he goes, wow, this paradise looks amazing. How did I get in? She says, well, you have to spell one word. What word? Czechoslovakia. We should always laugh and smile. Thank you so much. Everyone should be healthy, and God should
Thank
bless
you.
each of us with health and happiness and joy. Thank you all of you who have joined, and wishing everyone a happy Lag BaOmer.
Chag Sameach,
Okay,
everyone. Thank you so
Chag
much.
Sameach.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Stay
Thank
well.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Oh.